good evening everyone. Queen Elizabeth here, thanks for joining me. Welcome to my late night show. Tonight I have a very special guest, Benjamin, joining me. Benjamin is a Nobel Peace Prize recipient in educational psychology. Come on out.
Hello everyone. Thanks for having me, Queen Elizabeth. I'm ecstatic to be here.
You're welcome. Benjamin is here today to explain the cognitive theory as presented in Ormrod's educational psychology.
First off, let me explain to you the 5 assumptions behind the cognitive theory. But before I do that, let me define what cognitive processes mean. According to Ormrod, it is how individuals think and respond to events people encounter. Now that that's been made clear, let's get to the assumptions. Assumption number 1 states, students' way of thinking influences how and what they remember. Assumption number 2 suggests, behavior may foreshadow people's cognitive processes. Assumption number 3 explains items that are learned and processed are subject to individual choice. Assumption number 4 states, comprehension of new material is constructed by the learner, not solely by the environment. Lastly, assumption number 5 suggests, as learners' brains develop, they gain sophisticated cognitive processes.
Truly fascinating. But tell me, is there anything rather not so fascinating?
Yes, in fact there are a few weaknesses within the theory. The first undermines assumption number 2, that what is being learned is based on educational guesses, not necessarily scientific fact, according to Ormrod. The other weakness undermines assumption 3 and 4 by suggesting that children experience epistemic beliefs. Epistemic beliefs are the educational perspectives that affect the way the students approach learning.
Those do sound like some serious weaknesses. Thank you for explaining them. Your research also correlates to the educational video, talking to the text.
Yes, it does. Upon completion of this lesson within the video, students will be able to analyze a poem's meaning by deconstructing the content. We see cognitive theory being demonstrated when the teacher asks, "What jumped out at you?" The student replied that the poem was written by a Mexican guy. The teacher then asks, "How do you know that?" and the student inferred that it was of Mexican origins. Here we see the teacher having the student explain their reasoning, which helps the teacher assess how students are compiling knowledge. This exemplifies how cognitive theory is explained in Ormrod's text. Another example seen within the video is when the teacher places the students in groups. The teacher asks them to share their questions, impressions, and what the poem is all about in groups of 4. By having students share their interpretations, they are demonstrating an underlying concept of cognitive theory as explained by Ormrod.
Well, that is very interesting. Sounds like you really dissected that video. Now that you know so much information about this theory, is there any way you would teach this lesson differently with the theory in mind?
Yes, and my objective would be upon completion of this lesson, students will be able to interpret a poem's meaning by verbally participating in the class discussion. An alternative lesson plan would entail have the students explain their answers to the teacher's questions in a paragraph that incorporates personal experiences. By doing this, the teacher is able to assess the students based on their written explanations as compared to a predetermined rubric, according to Ormrod. In regards to the second instance I mentioned earlier, when the students broke up into groups, instead of having them share their questions and impressions, the teacher could have handed out a sheet of different questions to each group to pull from the poem. This helps self-monitor the learning process at this specific grade level, a strategy suggested by Ormrod.
That was utterly spectacular. I now know so much about the cognitive theory and the many underlying assumptions. I cannot wait to have you back on the show when you receive another Nobel Peace Prize in educational psychology.
Thank you, Your Majesty. It has been an absolute delight to explain my findings of the cognitive theory to you and the audience. I look forward to our next interview.
Me as well. You stay classy, London.